my name is Adina Levin with Friends of Caltrain. And, okay, let's, what the heck is that doing? All right, what was the most challenging part about organizing for Measure RR? Here, let me look at these questions before diving in. Who is most important to meet and engage with? Do you think the success of Measure R should? All right, excellent, great. So some really good questions that I hope to be able to address in talking about Measure RR and the effort to save Caltrain. And the description of this session in the program was about a rescue ballot measure. And the key actually to Measure RR was that it was well in the works long before COVID. So I don't know how many people here have some background in Caltrain. It's a super old service, started in 1863 under Abraham Lincoln, and the state of California had to take it over in about 1980 after the private service running it was failing, and the three counties, San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara County, took it over from the state and started running it as a Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board in 1992. In the 90s, it was San Mateo County that put up the money to buy the railroad from the state, cue foreshadowing music. So Caltrain was, there we go. Caltrain was, there are a number of sessions in this conference that are talking about about regional rail and about wanting to move U.S. rail from a history of commuter rail to something more along the lines of the international regional rail model. And Caltrain fits really squarely in that pattern. It was started along the traditional U.S. Commuter rail model of wanting to bring wealthy suburban commuters into their jobs in San Francisco. Like with that model, if you think that the rail is only serving one type of customer for one purpose, you don't need to have connections to the rest of the transit system, and it's not connected physically, and it's also not connected in terms of fares and schedules. So with Caltrain's modern incarnation starting in the 90s under being run by the three counties, San Mateo and San Francisco and Santa Clara counties, Caltrain never did have stable funding. So its public funding came from those three counties. And that three county revenue source was never stable. So on any given year, the way that this worked was on an annual basis, they used to have budget negotiations. And every year, each of the three partners would decide whether they were going to pay their bill. And that led to many ups and downs over time. I got involved in this in an earlier recession when one of the member agencies, in that case it was Samtrans, said, hey, we're having financial trouble, we can't pay our bill. And that took a big chunk out of the budget and resulted in the intention of cutting service by nearly 50%. At that time, I was on the management team of a startup software company, but I had gotten involved in transit through getting involved in local climate action and looking in transportation and starting to think about why the Bay Area, despite the fact that there's so much wealth in the area, and why people are in theory, there's a lot of smart people in the area. Why does our public transit really underperform? And I had gotten to know enough people, back in the 2010, 2011, that we were able to organize 4,000 to 5,000 people to contact the Regional Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Caltrain's partner boards to say, no, you are not going to set this on a death spiral. You're going to find the money to keep the system going. And that was temporarily successful at the time. The system was patched and going forward, but that instability continued and remained. And so the result of that is something that some people considered to be a success and a win, but was also a really significant vulnerability that was really revealed in its true form during COVID. That resulted in a very high dependence on fares. So Caltrain got, before COVID, was getting 70% of its revenue from fares. And the remainder was from those 3 partner agencies. But because of that instability, there was a long-standing need to have stable funding for that service. Friends of Caltrain was after being kind of an emergency project in that earlier recession, was turned into a nonprofit with the mission of getting stable funding and successful modernization of Caltrain in the context of a regional transit system that is well integrated and accessible to everybody. And so for the region, I'm going to go this way. So in order to address that unstable funding, there was a bill that was passed back in 2017 to authorize a tax measure to fund Caltrain. This was Senate Bill 797. It had a 1/8% sales tax, and cue ominous music, it required the approval of 3 counties, the 3 transit agency boards, and the Caltrain board in order to actually get it on the ballot. But Caltrain didn't go ahead and immediately put that on the ballot because very wisely, they said, we need to make a plan. If we're going to ask voters for money, we need to have a vision of what we're going to use that money for. Meanwhile, in 2018, and this was some more, in this case, good foreshadowing, SamTrans, which was the transit agency in San Mateo County, put a measure on the ballot. And the transit ballot measures have historically been very much led by the business community, who said, hey, we want to put a measure on the ballot. We will raise money and do what the proposal is. But based on some earlier work in Santa Clara County, transit advocates advocated to have public ownership of the ballot process. And SamTrans, the agency, worked with the county and convened a multi-stakeholder process where Friends of Caltrain was part of the Team C Transit and Environmental Justice Coalition. There was a process that had many different groups around the table, including business groups, and hashed out the expenditures and policies that would go into the measure. The business groups had originally wanted much more funding for highways, and with the environmental and transit justice groups at the table, we came up with something that had only 22.5% on highways, which was a big victory for us, But at the end of the day, when there was something that there were a lot of different people and groups that agreed with, there was a campaign where the grassroots groups, the business groups raised big money and did the advertising, and the grassroots groups did the grassroots voter outreach, the phone banking and text banking, and pre-COVID handing out flyers on trains and buses, and that succeeded. It won by 500 votes. And having that partnership between the advocacy groups and the community groups and the big campaign was a big part of that success. Meanwhile, Caltrain did the groundwork of figuring out what it is that the service could be and what voters would pay for. They did a business plan showing that there was a huge opportunity to increase ridership by taking that international model of regional rail, with instead of being focused on peak commuting, providing frequent all-day service, providing a clock face schedule that is easier to connect to, and better connections. And that would, importantly for voters in a car-dependent area, would really take a huge number of cars off the road and have major environmental benefits. Meanwhile, from the advocacy side, Friends of Caltrain had been working with other advocacy groups highlighting the disparities in terms of who had access to Caltrain. And after we did some grant-funded research and advocacy, Caltrain did their own fair study and found that, in fact, the highest income riders were paying the lowest in fares, and the lowest income riders were actually paying the highest fare per trip. So their own studies showed that. And also due to some of the, helped along by some of the advocacy we were doing locally, in the city of Palo Alto, they created a transportation management association and did a pilot program to provide Caltrain passes to low-income workers. And when they started doing that, there was a lot of skepticism. There was conventional wisdom was that low-income people, use buses. Low-income people certainly don't use trains because they don't want to use the train, and nobody's going to even live close enough to the train to take it. But they found they provided that option, and hundreds of people who worked in downtown Palo Alto used these free transit passes provided by the CDMA. This is Omar Chavez, who works at a local restaurant and is one of the people who travels from his home near Bayshore Caltrain to take Caltrain. And in this, so the advocates had encouraged Caltrain to do an equity study, which did in fact show the disparities in terms of who was using Caltrain. And they found that the ridership was whiter and wealthier than the community that it traverses. And they found that, in fact, transit connections was hugely important to equity because low-income people had a greater need to take transit to be able to connect to the regional service. And so the Caltrain business plan also had an equity and connectivity component that had policies to make the service more equitable and connected. So COVID hits, ridership falls through the floor, ridership falls to about 5% of the pre-COVID level, fare box revenue crashes, and a shutdown was a real possibility, and it would have taken 2 or more years to restart from a shutdown. The situation looked really dire, and even though the process had been started before COVID to work on a ballot measure, there was a huge amount of skepticism. Nobody thought, including transit advocates, that there was going to be any chance of passing a measure during a pandemic. But in June, there was a really surprisingly strong poll showing that there was a good chance of success with a good campaign. And those elements in the business plan of that vision that was put forward and built by the agency and helped along with some of the work that transit advocates had been doing were really popular with voters. So where the money would help to prevent traffic congestion, provide better connections with other transit, and make Caltrain more affordable and accessible. So with those positive polling results, started really a roller coaster of trying to get the measure on the ballot. So you'll remember that I said that back in that enabling legislation, 7 boards needed to take action all at the same time. So now it's late June and 7 boards need to take identical action by August. And those 7 boards did not all agree. Caltrain, as part of that business plan, had also been working on how to govern itself in this post-electrification world. And San Mateo County, which had the ability to be the managing agency based on putting up the money in the 1990s, got the ability to stay as a managing agency for as long as they wanted as a term in one of the earlier financial crises. And so some of the elected representatives on the board from San Francisco and Santa Clara County wanted to take the opportunity of this ballot measure to bake into the ballot measure a guarantee that the governance would change and that Samtrans would be removed as the managing agency, and created an amended version that would hold up the funding unless the governance changed, which was really dubiously legal according to the wording of that language. And so this almost didn't get on the ballot. So transit riders who wanted this on the ballot and wanted the service to continue at a higher priority than the interagency feud, we sent hundreds of letters. We had dozens of comments on the board. We get lots of, and eventually the having the ballot measure and on the ballot to keep the service running, it eventually did get on the ballot. So another piece on here is, and with that on the ballot, we used the model from Measure W, where the grassroots groups became the grassroots arm of the campaign. So Friends of Caltrain, San Francisco Transit Riders, Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition, YIMBY Action, Seamless Bay Area, and dozens of other grassroots and advocacy groups did the phone banking and the text banking, while the business and labor contributed significant amounts of money for the advertising. And with all of that, we got over 500 volunteers sending over 100,000 text messages, 16,000 phone calls, 8,000 emails to family and friends, and got the measure successfully passed. It needs to get over 2/3 because of Prop 13 in California, which makes it really hard to get taxes. So with Measure RR having passed, Caltrain is not at a risk of shutdown. The region is heading into an uncertain post-COVID world for transit, where there's going to be a lot of work needed to get transit back up and running, including hopefully now more federal funding. And the missing links in terms of connectivity are things that Caltrain can't do alone, and the region still isn't organized to deliver. So for ongoing advocacy, I'm a co-founder of Seamless Bay Area, which is an organization that is focused on creating a seamlessly integrated regional transit network, as opposed to having a transit governance modeled based on local control with interagency fighting. And Trans Bay Coalition is, building on the work of Friends of Caltrain, working on a variety of regional campaigns to continue the work of a transit advocacy. So with that, I will take some questions for as long as we've got. So are people talking for questions, or are we using the chat for questions?
It's whatever you prefer. There were some questions in the chat, but I'm sure people would raise their hands if.
Okay, I hope you could hear me, by the way, because I just turned audio up. So let's see, did Samtrans ever get repaid? And the answer is partially, but not entirely. And San Mateo County still is owed money, and the amount of money that San Mateo County thinks it is owed is going to be a topic of significant debate. All right, let's see. I'm looking for more questions. Why do the transit funding mechanisms so frequently use sales taxes? So that has been conventional, and it's a combination of polling and the fact that businesses have done most of the fundraising to get a measure on the ballot. It's expensive to get a measure on the ballot and do the advertising to get something to pass. However, in the Bay Area, there is now, so back when SB 797 was on the ballot, Friends of Caltrain was interested, but there really wasn't support to push for more progressive funding mechanisms. Now there is a group called Voices for Public Transportation, which is working on a potential regional funding measure and wants to see more progressive revenue mechanisms and build power to be able to do that. Jedwin asks, is Caltrain becoming an electrified rapid transit corridor? How can we ensure that adequate integration with local bus networks is achieved? So one thing to look and participate in is Seamless Bay Area, which is working on governance reforms to ensure better integration in the system. So that's something where the region needs some significant change in order to make sure that that happens. Let's see, I see somebody has a hand raised.
Yes, did you ever get to listen to the Well, There's Your Problem episode about the struggle for referendum RR?
No.
Please. Yeah, it's really good.
Okay. Thank you. And then there was a question about voting for a BART district expansion. So there's going to be a lot of debate and discussion starting both at the Caltrain level and at the regional level about governance of Caltrain, governance of regional rail, and governance of transit. And if you sign up for a Seamless Bay Area, you will get updates on that, and there's going to be a lot going on to help bring about a governance of an integrated system, and that is a longer topic than I think I am close to out of time for. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this roller coaster of the Measure RR success story and are inspired to continue to advocate for Caltrain being integrated into a regional transit system and having equitable access, whether you're in the Bay Area and help us out here, or whether you are elsewhere and are inspired for your own region. Thank you.